Hey guys, it's Courtney and welcome to day number 6 of our kit week. Today we're going to be taking a look at the kit that I am most familiar with, and this is the Simon Says Stamp monthly card kit. I have been subscribing to this kit for probably 6 or 7 years, if not more. So I have accumulated a lot of Simon Says Stamp products, and I think this kit is obviously great, or else I wouldn't have subscribed to it for so long. So before we take a look at what's in this month's kit, let's take a look at some of the subscription details. So as a subscriber, you will receive the kit for $29.99 per month plus shipping. Now the kit reveals on the 14th of every month, and you'll see it on social media and on YouTube. And then you have the option to skip that kit if you prefer. You just have to email them and you can skip that one as long as you contact them by the 16th of that month. Now, the benefit of being a subscriber versus making a one-off purchase is, number one, you're guaranteed to get the kit, and you also save $5 on the kit. So next, we're going to take a look at what comes in the latest card kit. And you can see that it did come in a box that you can easily reuse and keep all of your contents in. And everything is protected by this paper bag as well. With every single kit, you will receive a lollipop, and they have been doing this forever, for as long as I've been subscribing. You always get a little treat there. And you also get an inspiration sheet. Along with several different examples made with the kit, it does all list the contents in the kit as well as the name of the kit. Now, this month we have 3 pieces of cardstock, and this is all typically heavyweight cardstock that comes in these kits. And we have a white, a pink, and a red in this kit. Sometimes you get a little bit more, but honestly, cardstock doesn't really matter to me in kits. Next we have 3 envelopes, and these are all Simon Says Stamp envelopes. And we have a silver, a pink, and a white, and the silver is metallic. I don't know whether you can see that shine on the camera. And the Simon Says Stamp envelopes are pretty heavy duty, and they come with this little stick thing, so you don't have to worry about wetting the envelope. Next, we have some embellishments. We have little heart embellishments, and these are similar to what came in the Brutus Monroe kit, only these are just a little bit bigger, but same colors. Next, we have some embellishments by Nuvo, and these are little teardrops. I tried to get the container open, but I just didn't feel like struggling with it. But I'm sure I'll be using it on cards, so you'll get a closer look at what these look like. And they come in a little jar that you can reseal. Next, we have a roll of score tape, which if you've never used score tape before, it's a really, really sticky double-sided adhesive tape. And this is the really thin one, perfect for shaker cards. And this stuff is heavy duty. Next, we have a package of pattern paper, and I'm going to flip through these so that you can see the patterns. These are all single-sided, and they're all kind of a vintagey pink Valentine's Day theme. They're really, really pretty pattern papers. Like I've said before, I typically struggle with pattern paper, but this particular set is one that I will definitely be happy to use. So next we have the stamp set, which every month we have a 6x8 stamp set. And sometimes you even get another stamp set on top of that, or a background stamp. But in this case, we have a die that goes along with it. But you can see that the stamp set has 3 different frames and lots of different sentiments and different elements that you can add to these little frames. And then for the coordinating die, this fits directly inside these images and cuts out 3 mini frames in each one, perfect for shaker cards. And we obviously have some embellishments to do that with. And we also have a shaker window that will fit directly in these little squares here. You can certainly use acetate, but this way you can try out this new product. Well, not new, but something maybe you've never tried. So let's go ahead and make some cards. Okay, so for the first card, I'm going to go ahead and line up this heart frame onto a piece of Canson watercolor paper. And I went ahead and stamped this out twice with Fade Out ink by Ink on 3. I did stamp this twice. Number 1, it's a huge image. Number 2, it's textured. And number 3, it's a little bit hard to see on camera with the Fade Out ink because it is so light. Once that was done, I went ahead and took some of the individual heart stamps and kind of just scattered those throughout. And I just used my acrylic block for this. I know I'm only stamping these once, but they're pretty small, so I didn't have a problem. Next, I went ahead and did some basic watercoloring with the Arteza watercolors, which I'm no watercolor artist, but I really like the Arteza. And I'm using two different colors here. One is just straight from the pan, and the other one I mixed with a little bit of pink just to get a little bit of variation. And I'm just adding my color down a little bit, and then I will spread that out with some water. And you'll notice that each and every time I go in, I'm going with a damp paintbrush. I'm not going in just with a soaking wet paintbrush where it's dripping. I kind of dab that off on my paper towel a little bit each time, just so that I just have a little bit of water down, a little sheen of water, I should say. I kind of let the paints do their job. I let them spread out on their own. And then once they're almost dry, I go back in and add a little bit more shading. For the hearts off to the right-hand side, I'm adding more shading to the right. For the other side of the card panel, I'm adding my shading to the left. And I just kind of went back and forth with the two different colors that I'm using. I felt like these matched the pattern paper pretty nicely. And just kind of went through and added more as I went along, and added more color as I went along, I should say, until I was happy with the results. Just keeping in mind that watercolors, no matter what watercolors you're using, typically dry back a little bit, meaning that they get a little bit lighter as they dry. So once that was all done, I went ahead and used the die cut that cuts out the 3 different frames. And I did use some washi tape just to hold that in place so that it doesn't shift around when going through my MISTI. And honestly, I didn't line this up too good. You can still see the line, especially on one side of the fade out ink. But I kind of went back and forth, and ultimately, we will fix that. So I'm using a piece of the pattern paper, which originally I was going to use this pattern, and it just didn't mix well at all with the colors that I used for the watercoloring. I tried to kind of tone that line down with just water, thinking maybe that would work, but that's not how fade out ink works. It works because it fades into the color, not clean water. So like I said, we'll get back to that eventually. So I went ahead and kind of played around with the pattern paper and ultimately liked this one much better for the colors that I used. So I went ahead and trimmed this down, and I trimmed it down just a little bit smaller than my card panel just to make it easier to line up. And then I went ahead and stuck everything down, and I'm using my Tombow Mono multi glue. That way I have a couple of seconds to kind of shift things around if needed. I'm not creating a shaker out of this. I'm just using the windows. So you will want to make sure that you're adding adhesive in between all of those little sections or those little windows as well, to make sure that it does lie down flat against your card panel. Next, I went ahead and added my sentiment. I wanted my sentiment strip to closely match the colors that I used for the hearts. So I just used my Copic chart to kind of match that up to make sure that I could find a color that closely matches that pattern paper or even the hearts. Something that will match. There's a lot of different pinks, so it wasn't too difficult to come up with something that matched good. And I just scribbled that down onto a scrap piece of white cardstock. That way it will appear as if I used colored cardstock to match the colors, even though I just really colored it. So once that's done, I went ahead and treated that with my anti-static tool, stamped out my sentiment with Versamark ink, sprinkled on some white embossing powder, and then trimmed that down into a skinny little strip that will go across the middle window. And I popped that up with some foam tape. Now, going back to these lines that I have along my frame where I really didn't line that die up correctly, I tried now to use a sand eraser to kind of tone it down. I knew I wouldn't get it away completely, but I tried to tone it down with a sand eraser. That still didn't work. But as I'm looking at it, it looks like pencil lines. So I ended up bringing in my T-square ruler and a pencil and just went in with really light pressure and just added a frame around the whole thing to kind of match everything else. And that's it. That's it for card number 1. Moving on to card number 2, I am going to go ahead and stamp out the floral frame, and this time I'm working on a piece of Neenah Solar White 80-pound cardstock, and I went ahead and stamped that out with blackout ink this time, also by Ink on 3, because this is a Copic Safe ink. Again, this is a huge image, so I did stamp this twice, but for the technique that I'm doing here, it really doesn't matter. As long as you can see the outline of the image, you can pretty much get away with stamping it only once. It doesn't matter how great of an impression you get. So we are going to go ahead and draw in a frame in the inside. So I'm just going along the lines where basically the images end. And again, using my T-square ruler, you can use any straight edge here, and a Copic Safe pen. I'm using an EK Success journaling pen, which I have heard they are discontinuing. So I'm very upset about that. I have to find something else that works good that isn't too expensive because I'm cheap and broke. So I went ahead and colored in, or framed in, the inside, and then I'm going to move on to the coloring. And I'm not going to show you all of this because it is a little repetitive. I am going to go ahead and start off with the leaves, starting off with the darkest color just to kind of keep that contrast, and just added a little bit of shading on the base and up towards the center of the leaves, blending that out with the G94, and then I'll finish off with the G43 as my highlight color just for the tips of the leaves. Now, for these little, I think they're supposed to be berries, but we're not going to color them as berries. I am going to bring in a G29, and these are so tiny, I'm not going to bother to do any shading to them. I'm just going to fill in these little dots solid with that G29. Now for my flowers, I'm going to be using my favorite red combination. And again, I'm going to go right in with my darkest color, and this will minimize the amount of bleeding. We know that reds and dark pinks and sometimes even purples tend to bleed a little bit more than most color combinations. So going in with your darkest color first will minimize that because you're not saturating the paper all that much. And these colors blend perfectly. So I didn't have a problem. I'm just going to show you the small little flower, which I pretty much shaded the same way as the leaves. And for this larger flower, I'm just paying attention to what petals are overlapping another petal that would create a shadow. And also some of these petals have a little fold on them where they're folded over on themselves. That would also create a shadow. So I went ahead and added my R89, which is the darkest color, and then moving on to the R46, and I'm blending some of these areas out, but I'm also creating even more shadows. So not every shadow needs to be done with the darkest color. Some of the shadows I'm creating with my darkest midtone. Next, I'm blending those out with the R24, and then again, I will finish off with the R22 for the highlight color. And I went around the entire frame and used the same color combination and basically the same shading techniques, I guess you could say, for the entire image. Once that is done, you will notice that I left my stamp inside my MISTI because we are going to be stamping this again. I did fix any coloring errors with a white gel pen. When you're using red, please use your white gel pen and not your colorless blender. You're just going to smear the color. So I treated that with my anti-static tool, and then I went ahead and restamped my image directly over the first impression. With this time, I'm using VersaFine Onyx Black ink, which is a fast drying pigment ink, but because it is a pigment ink, it is great for heat embossing. So I went ahead and stamped that out, and then I will sprinkle on some clear embossing powder, and this is the detailed clear embossing powder because this image is pretty intricate. You don't want to use anything that's too chunky or bulky. Once I did that, I went ahead and heat set that, and I do make sure that my heat gun is heated up for about 30 seconds or so before bringing that to the paper. Again, this will minimize the amount of warping if your heat gun is already heated up. Once that's done, I did go ahead and trim this down from the top and the bottom. This will be a landscape card, just 1/4 of an inch, just to have a little bit of a border showing so that it's not just a plain panel. I'm okay with a plain panel, but sometimes just adding a little extra interest makes the card really pop. And I went ahead and layered this onto a red card base, and this is the red cardstock that actually comes in the kit. So I have a little bit of a border on the top and the bottom of my card panel. For my sentiment, I went ahead and stamped out the I love you with the larger I love you sentiment with that same VersaFine Onyx Black ink right there in the center of my little frame that we drew in there. And then for my sentiment strip, I'm just using some more of that red cardstock. Again, just stamping that out with the VersaFine ink and heat embossing that with the clear embossing powder. And again, you will want to make sure that you use an anti-static tool so that you don't get embossing powder sticking to areas that you don't want it to be. Once that's done, I cut that down into a skinny little strip, and this will be popped up directly underneath that I love you. And that is it for card number 2. Card number 3, we are going to be doing a little bit more coloring, but this time we are only going to be using one image out of the stamp set. And I'm going to be using this little balloon here. And there is a balloon string stamp, but I'm not going to be using that. I'm just going to draw my own in. I went ahead and stamped out 2 of the balloons on my card panel and 2 on a piece of Simon Says Stamp masking paper. You can really use any masking for this because I'm not doing ink blending. I typically stick to the Simon Says Stamp, especially when I'm doing ink blending or if it's something that I want to reuse because it is super tacky. So I just cut out some of the balloon because I don't need to cut out the bottom portion. I really only need to mask out the top portion of each of these balloons. And then I went ahead and stamped out the balloon once again directly in the center, well, kind of offset a little bit, right above these to make it look like we have a little mini bunches or a mini bunch of balloons here. I went ahead and removed my masks, and then I used another EK Success journaling pen just to draw in my little balloon strings. And I kind of just made little wavy and squiggly lines for that. For my coloring, I'm going to be using 2 different pink combinations here, but I'm not going to show you all of the coloring. I'm just going to show you one to show you how I actually colored the balloons. So I like to start off with my lightest color to map out my darkest areas and to get the paper saturated a little bit. So I'm just going to add a little bit of shading on either side, coming up on either side of the balloon, but I'm not going all the way over to the edge or to the line of the image. I'm leaving a little bit of space there. And I'm also adding a little bit of shading to the center from the bottom up. And then I'm going to blend those out each time. So these little curvy lines on either side, I'm blending that out towards the center and also towards the edge each time so that I have a little bit of highlight, and this will just make it look a little bit more transparent and a little bit more shiny. So I went ahead and colored the other 2 balloons the same way, just used 2 different combinations there. And then I went ahead and did my sentiment pretty much the same way as I have been. If I don't have the colored cardstock to match, I create my own just by coloring in my cardstock with my marker. Went ahead and stamped out my sentiment, and I lined up 2 of the sentiments from the stamp set, stamped that out with that same VersaFine Onyx Black ink, and then cut that down into a strip. I also cut down some of the pattern paper that sort of matches the colors that I used for the balloon, and I cut 2 strips from this, one a little bit thicker than the other, and one will be behind my sentiment strip and one will be off to the side of the card panel just to add a little bit of pattern to this so it's not so much white space. So I went ahead and adhered everything together. First I adhered this larger strip here right along the right hand side, and then I could adhere my sentiment strip directly on top of that, and I adhered the other skinnier strip off to the left hand side of the panel. I finished off the card with a little bit of shimmer using a Spectrum Noir shimmer pen on top of the balloons, and then added a few white gel pen highlights to each one of them as well. And that is it for this one. Moving on to card number 4. This time I am using the stamps for the balloon frame, but these are 2 separate pieces. So I'm going to be using these separately. And I have a piece of Neenah Solar White 80-pound cardstock, and I am basically creating a frame, well, a border, I should say, not a frame, on either side of my card panel. I did have to trim down my card panel a little bit just so that my, I guess, pattern of balloons kind of goes across the entire thing, and I can just kind of line that up, making sure that it's going to look like one continuous pattern. if that makes any sense. And I went ahead and stamped this out with Blackout ink by Ink on 3 because we are going to be doing a little bit more Copic coloring. Then I can turn around my card panel and stamp the other portion of this balloon frame on the other side. Now, one side is a little bit bigger. The balloons are a little bit bigger, or the balloons are the same size, but you can see more of the balloons. I hope that makes sense to you guys. And it looked a little funny. So I ended up trimming down a little bit more of the one side just to kind of make this look a little bit more even before I actually moved on to the coloring. And again, I'm not going to show you all of the coloring here. I colored the balloons the same way as I did for the other card with the balloons, but this time I'm just using a variety of different colors. I'm using blues, yellows, reds, and greens just to kind of make it look kind of like birthday-ish, if that makes any sense. Once the coloring was done, I went ahead and adhered this down to a black piece of cardstock that is cut a little bit larger than my panel and a little bit smaller than an A2 size card. And I stamped out my sentiment right there in the center, again, using that VersaFine Onyx Black ink. I added a little bit more shimmer to the balloons and the little confetti pieces, and it looked a little bit too plain, which I like plain, but it looked a little bit too plain. So I kind of played around to see if I should add some embellishments. I did take out some of the Nuvo embellishments that come in the kit. They're little kind of like teardrop shaped, but they're beautiful, but they just don't match this card. So I ended up using some of the clear glitter Nuvo drops, and I can't think of the name, but as always, I'll link it below anyway, and just kind of scattered those around the sentiment just to kind of break up all of that white space. And that is it for this one. Super, super simple. We're going to move on to the fifth and final card for this kit, and I am taking a piece of the pink cardstock that comes in the kit, and this is cut down to an A2 size card. Again, I'm going to bring out this heart frame and stamping this twice again with that same fade out ink that we used for the first card. This time I am going to die cut the center before I do my coloring, just to make sure that I actually have it lined up the correct way this time. Again, I stuck that down with some washi tape to make sure that it doesn't shift around as it goes through my die cutting machine. And then we're going to move on to the coloring. And this time I'm going to bring out my colored pencils, and I'm going to color all of the hearts the same exact way, so I'm not going to show you all of the coloring again, but I kept the coloring very simple for this one. So I'm doing my shading pretty much the same way as I did with the watercolor panel as far as where my shadows and highlights are. And I'm going to go right in with my darkest pencil first. And I'm going in with a very, very light hand and just adding a little bit of shading. Then I'll go down to my mid-tone colors. And as I add my mid-tone colors, I'm starting off on the color before that. So when I'm going with my darkest mid-tone, I'm starting off on that darkest color and kind of pulling that out as I add a little bit more color to it, if that makes sense. So as you're doing your shading, you don't want to start off where that color is actually going to be. You want to start off on the color before, or else you're not going to get them to blend. And just go in with a light hand. Keep in mind that you can always add more if needed, as long as you go in with a light hand. The more pressure you add, the harder they're going to be to blend, and you're not going to be able to add any more if you add too much pressure. So I went ahead and colored in all of the hearts, same color combination, same type of shading as we did with the watercolor panel. And we are going to make this a shaker card. I did have a few areas where I kind of smudged my color, so I'm using this eraser, and it's really, it's a weird consistency. It's like a putty almost, but it works really well with colored pencils. So I'll link that below because it is definitely handy if you use colored pencils. Cutting 2 little strips of this same pattern paper, again, just to add a little bit of interest to the card. And I am going to add my shaker frame that comes in the kit with the score tape that also comes in the kit. So if you've never used score tape before, it is super, super sticky and very permanent. It's not moving once you have everything down. It's also you can tear it, which I really like. You don't necessarily need to use scissors. So I am going to go ahead and line up all of these little frames, or line all of these little frames with my score tape. Once that's done, you want to add a little bit of pressure to make sure that it's really stuck down onto your card panel. And then I would recommend either using a craft pick or a pair of scissors to remove the backing, because it can be a little bit difficult. Unless you got nails, I typically don't have a problem, but those nail polish smudges, I'm just so sick of seeing them. I really need to start using my gel nail polish again. But I went ahead and removed all the backing, and then I can line up my shaker windows here, and they are not going anywhere after this. So I went ahead and added my shaker elements, and I'm just using the little hearts that come in the kit. And then I am adding my Tombow Mono Multi Glue. I'm switching back to my wet glue for this because I may not line this up perfectly the first time, especially being I'm going to be lining this up upside down. So I prefer to use the wet glue. That way I can shift things around if needed. And I lined even the inside or in between the little windows so that they don't move around. Went ahead and laid my card base directly over my card panel, trying my best to line it up the best I can. I did hold this down for just a couple of seconds before flipping it over so that my shaker pieces didn't fall all out. And then I can kind of slide it around to make sure that it is lined up. I went ahead and added the two little strips of the pattern paper on either side of my card panel there. And again, I like to add my wet glue directly to the card base and then adhere my strips. It's just easier for me that way. And I just cut off any remaining that's kind of hanging off that card. I finished off the card with a sentiment from the same stamp set using Hollyhock ink, also by Simon Says Stamp. This is probably my favorite pink out of all of the ink colors from Simon Says Stamp. And that is it for this one. And I'm sorry about that glare for the sun. So let's take a quick look at all 5 cards that we created today with the Simon Says Stamp card kit. As always, I will leave all of the supplies as well as the subscription information for the Simon Says Stamp card kit in the description box below. Thank you guys so much for stopping by today, and have a great day. Bye.